It's Joe, your faithful host and co-founder of Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. In case you missed our birthday, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary this summer. For 10 years, we've been getting together each and every week to bring you epic tales of tech support and business management, and I'm pretty sure we've saved a lot of people a ton of time by sharing our struggles and solutions. Starting now, we're shifting our focus to the Patreon community. That means the newest shows will be posted primarily on Patreon. How do you get the latest episodes? Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click on support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the weekly patron-only episodes right in your favorite podcast app. If you already support us on Patreon, log in there to get your special link and subscribe to the patron-only show so you don't miss anything. Here on the public show, we'll be featuring classic episodes hand-selected for you from our catalog of over 500 episodes, along with occasional new episodes too. And remember, we're regularly releasing new content on Patreon, where you can join our community of supporters starting at just $15 per month, giving you access to the freshest content. We feature dozens of exclusive shows on Patreon where we speak a little more freely about how we make business decisions, navigate client relationships, manage our employees, and sometimes deal with mistakes and difficulties too. Plus, as a patron, you receive access to our entire back catalog where you can revisit classic episodes and learn from colleagues we've interviewed who've shared their own best practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support to pledge monthly on Patreon. We'd really appreciate your support, and we're confident your business will benefit from the wisdom of the community we've gathered there. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Command Control Power. So someone had something they wanted to lead in with here. I thought someone mentioned.
Jerry? Joe, you had mentioned you had been, I'm going to throw it back in your court. Touche. You had mentioned that you've been playing around a little bit with Maverick Server because you're going to deploy Maverick Server installation for a client. And my gut inclination when you said that, and this is, God's honest truth, is, why go down that road? I mean, I know that, that's all that Apple has available right now. But I think if I were to do that, again, depending on what the client wanted to do, I mean, if they just wanted to do file sharing on Macs, I'd probably go Mavericks. But I'm almost like, I'm still a 10.8 guy.
Well, two answers. One is the Mac Pro. So, I mean, I think running Mavericks and a little more cutting edge, server OS than I would normally run. I'd prefer to run Mavericks, the supported OS on the Mac Pro, than trying to downgrade it, which I don't think is possible on the new Mac Pro. So that's kind of that's what I'm facing. The other reason is it really is just file sharing for the most part. It's VPN and file sharing. And that's about it. It's just Windows and Macs basically connecting for file sharing.
Now, what is the wisdom of the crowd right now on VPN? Can we do L2TP without a problem with Mavericks?
With the latest update, right?
Yeah, they fixed it.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're actually doing PBTP because they have a Zywall in place that does L2TP, and in fact they're doing that's mainly for the site to site. They have three different offices now, so we're using the site to site tunnels on the Zywall for that, and that's just using I guess IPsec tunnels between the offices. It's also running L2TP, so we can get in if we need to that way. But for individual users, we're configuring PPTP because they do have occasionally a couple of users in one place. It's not one of the existing offices. So you can't do multiple users from one remote location over the same internet connection with L2TP over IPsec.
I thought you said Zywall at first. I was like, is that a new Zywall?
I know. Joe's made his own firewall server.
We're getting into hardware now. I need one more thing on my plate.
I hear what Jerry's saying, though. I mean, I see a couple of guys saying they've done a few Mav servers, and I have too, but I have definitely seen some problems. My recent problems were file sharing on the Windows side. with Maverick Server. And I had to go so far as to downgrade my Windows 7 machines to SMB1 protocol to correct the issue, because they were having major lag issues with SMB2 on the PCs.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my next step over the next couple weeks to test this. To use my server for testing, like from Windows machines and stuff like that. But I've been dealing with that issue I was telling you guys about before we went live, which is the slow authentication from one particular client machine in our office here, which I've just begun troubleshooting, and it's been a little bit of a, banging your head against the wall kind of thing.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I mean, I've gotten, I set up a server not too long ago. Everything looked great. I walked away, and 2 days later, it was like, our PCs can't connect. And I was like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
And, it's rough when that happens, because everything looks good at first. Everyone's so happy and thankful and all that. And you walk away, and then all hell breaks loose. It's tough to deal with, because the mood changes immediately from the client to thank you so much to what the hell did you do to us?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's like...
Yeah. And I reached out to Sam this week. Thank you, Sam. Again, I was on site, and that's what I was on a 10.8 server, and that's what happened. We swapped out the router for an Apple router, and everything went to hell. So we put the Linksys router back in place. I don't know if that's ultimately what did it, but everything went south after that.
Yeah, Mike just mentioned that there have been some discussions lately on the ACN alum list about permissions issues when file sharing between Mac and PC, which I haven't tested that, but that gave me pause as well. That looks a little bit dicey.
Yeah, it is dicey. I mean, like, depending on the size of the client, you can manage those issues. But if you have a larger client connecting to this, and it could wreak a lot of havoc. So, a few users you can deal with.
Yeah, it's a great point. Joe, how mission critical is it that, would this client be flexible in that kind of a situation where it's kind of working but not kind of working?
It's a decent number of users, and they wouldn't be too thrilled with the new server impacting their workflow. Although they are I think 90% Mac or something, and they're actually trying to go all Mac slowly but surely. So I don't know how much these issues will impact them. And also, for the most part, the PC users are accessing specific shares only. So there isn't a lot of overlap where the Mac users are accessing the same files as the PC users. So that might save us in this case.
Could. Hopefully you guys will be okay. Hopefully it rolls out smoothly. But we talked about it before the show too, and it's incredibly important what you're already doing to be client zero. We kind of discussed that, is that you're already in the practice of trying it out in your office before you roll it out. So that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, at least if you do that, even if you don't catch the issues and you run into problems later, at least you've done your due diligence. It's the worst feeling when you go into a client and you encounter an issue that you should have found ahead of time.
Yeah,
that's the worst feeling, because I've been there. So
we all have.
Yeah. Before the show, as Joe and Sam were discussing this, I was playing the role of the client. I was just saying, "Are you done yet? Have you figured it out? Do you guys reboot the machine? Right. Maybe that'll fix it." We've all been. This same client this past week was very much like that. He just wants to stand there and offer numbskull suggestions. Are you trying to get the his team of 20 PCs operable again? And he's like,
yeah, does it help if I stand here? It's like,
no, it's the worst.
That is the worst. It's very distracting. It's like,
man.
You're trying to justify everything you're doing as you're doing it. It's just like, okay.
I feel like I can't stand there thinking. I have to be doing something with the keyboard. I'm like, all right, let me try this, and start moving faster just because someone's standing over me. I'm like, get away.
Exactly. Yeah, that is the worst.
And he prefaces everything that he says with, this may sound like a stupid thought and suggestion, but
you're probably right.
Let me just stop you there.
Yeah, you should just say your words, not mine. Oh man.
I do have to say one quick thing though about Profile Manager, whether or not you use it for its enrollment process and all that, one thing I found really cool that impresses the hell out of clients lately is if they say, well, I got to connect to my calendar server, or I got to get this VPN set up. And I go into Profile Manager and configure it in there, and then I just download it as a manual profile. I don't even have to enroll them if I want to. And I send it to them. I'm like, just double click this and you're done. And they're like, holy cow. They're like, that's so awesome, because they were waiting for all these steps to get done, and we have like 10 users to do. I'm like, boom, just click this. And it blows them away with profiles. It really does.
That's awesome. No, I missed the part. I was distracted. I was reading the chat. But what specifically are you configuring with that?
Mostly calendar contacts, so like CalDAV and CardDAV stuff, and VPN configurations.
Oh, cool. So you are you? Does that mean you're using the contacts and calendar server?
Yeah, but you can also configure it to connect to like another CalDAV client or something compatible.
Right.
So, or even another VPN client. I mean, I've been doing mostly the server ones, because we have some small offices that actually used OS X Server VPN, and that works great. I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
That's a great tip, and then that's something you just have, that you can deploy in the future as well. Because this client that I'm imagining, I'm going to set up the Maverick server in a couple weeks, and it's just really common. They're onboarding a lot of new users all the time. They're switching roles. They're switching machines. So it's nice to have something you can deploy, not only like, for 20 users all at once up front, but just to have something in the future you can send to a client. Yeah.
I might be getting too kind of deep into it, but I did find one thing recently where I was trying to deploy a VPN profile, I think it was. And when I went to save it, I wanted to leave the username blank so that each user can fill it in when they get the profile. And it kept saying required, and I couldn't save it. So I was like, this is stupid. How can I send this out with someone's information in it? So I found that I had to input a username, save it, go back into the profile and remove the username, and then I could save it. So it was like a little glitch that I found, or maybe I'm not the only one, I don't know. But that allowed me to then roll it out without credentials preset on it for users.
Interesting. So you don't have to edit the actual file. You can just use Profile Manager to do that?
Yeah. I just went back in and took it out and resaved it.
Interesting.
But I'm digging the profile stuff for my clients. They really get impressed by that stuff.
That's cool. That's a nice little add-on. Again, it's perfectly fine to just use. In my case, I just do a lot of VPN and file sharing servers, but that it doesn't. It sounds like it's not all that more complicated to configure Profile Manager and use it for that purpose. That's great.
Yeah, even without the whole enrollment stuff, if you don't want it.
Right.
So just to play devil's advocate for a second, and I guess your answer, Sam, would probably be no. But I would just think that with just some of the overall bugginess of 10.9, just adding Profile Manager to the brew, to the stew, kind of just is like looking for trouble. unless you can just sort of nuke and pave and start over, and the client's happy, and you really don't care. I mean, I just think sometimes in these real production environments where it's like, it's your tail is on the line here, and you just got to get this thing switched over and do whatever you need to do and get in there and get out. Sometimes it's like, let's play with Profile Manager, and I hear you, and I see the benefit of it, and I've done that before where I've saved the VPN profile and then emailed it to somebody, and they, like you say, they double clicked it and it just automatically installs, and that's great. But it's just like sometimes, again, we don't get any sort of communication from the mothership like, okay, guys, everything looks good. You should have no problem. It's smooth sailing from here. It's just like basically there's no feedback coming back, and it's all anecdotal, what we share with ourselves as far as ACNs go. And I just find sometimes like, I just get really sort of like, I don't want to start looking for trouble. I don't know. It's just that's just the way I've been rolling.
When did you get
days.
So cautious, Jerry? I always remember hearing a lot of stories about playing fast and loose with the upgrades.
I think it all depends on the client. It really does. There's some clients where it's like, yeah, we could try this. Let's see what happens. And there's like 5 users in the group, and it's like it's no big deal. But like where I was in the trench a couple days ago. It's just like, man, you just don't want to screw with it. You just want to use the things that are tried and true. I mean, I'm not dismissing the value of it at all. I'm just saying, the counterpoint to that is.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Jerry. I'm cautious in that way where, I'm afraid if I go down that road that should be a 10-minute, walk in the park, it ends up being just a nightmare, where you you try to activate, you try to turn that on, or you try to, create a profile, and you get stuck in a situation like Sam was describing where, you're like 90% of the way there, but you can't save it without the username. And then it takes you, an hour and a half to figure out that you have to save it with the username and then go back and change it. You know what I mean? Where you can,
right. Yeah. It didn't take me an hour and a half.
and you're 2 hours deep into it, and now you're thinking like, oh man, can I build a client for this full 2 hours, or just so I have to eat some of this, And it's just like, oh God, all I want to do is like, maybe have some lunch or maybe dinner,
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, each situation is different, but yeah, you got to be careful when new rollouts or changes, and just don't jump the gun.
Yeah, I may want to practice just the beginning to end Mavericks deployment a few more times before my first on-site one, because I think I don't know. I feel like I was really eager to start with a clean server and just do it right. Take every step, and not have to backtrack at all, because I feel like when you're deploying a server and something doesn't work and you're troubleshooting, trying to fix it, suddenly you're changing all kinds of variables, and sometimes it's hard to change them back, and it's like,
yep.
You like 2 years from now, I might be faced with like a problem that it stemmed from the fact that I toggled some setting, when I was configuring the thing, and I forget that I turned it on, and it's not visible in the GUI anywhere, or something like that. Some command line I'm trying to use, command trying to fix something, and that's what I'm always afraid of. So I feel like it's good to, like, once you figure out the kind of recipe for getting it, up and running, maybe like just nuke and pave it, and then go through those steps cleanly. I think that might be I might give that a go in this case.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, sometimes it can be a real house of cards where all of a sudden, the transgressions that happened in the very beginning somehow, weeks later or months later come back to haunt you.
Yeah, particularly with things like, I don't know, Open Directory always just kind of concerns me. Like, unless it's like just perfect from the start, it's kind of hard to walk it back a little bit and then start over. Like, I'm never quite sure it's totally clean,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've got a mail server that I administrate, and that's the one that's using Cario that I've referred to in the past. And every time we need to change a password on the mail server, because it's still using the Mac to add the clients and add the passwords, and then Cario looks to the Mac's Open Directory for that. I have to unbind the server because the server can't ever sort of authenticate properly into the Open Directory. So I have to unbind it and rebind it again. Or I have to force unbind, rebind it again, go in, change whatever I need to change. And then within like 10 to 15 minutes, the thing gets corrupted again. Oh. But it works, it works until you have to like make another password change or modification. So whatever's sort of happening behind the scenes, Cario's fine with it. It's just that you can't just make any changes. You can't add users. You can't modify passwords until you go through this little chicane that you have to kind of run through. And it's like, so I told my client, I said, look, you just can't go in here anymore and into Workgroup Manager and modify people's passwords. You just have to, another 15 minutes of billable time.
You have to call me.
You have to call me, and I have to go through this little thing, and they were like, oh, okay. No, I said, no, look, when I was on site one time, and I said, this is what I have to do to make it work.
You see what I'm dealing with here?
Yeah.
Hey, quick little side note. Sorry, Jerry.
No, that's yeah. End of sentence.
I was going to say, quick little side note that kind of dates back to something, I don't know how long ago we discussed it, but remember a while back when we talked about File Vault and or File Vault 2 and not using it on servers in case it had to reboot or something?
Yeah.
So that's changed in that it actually goes to like a safe lock mode, like you know how you have safe sleep in File Vault 2? Mm-hmm. So when you reboot, it actually gets past that point of the drive being locked at startup, and it goes to the safe sleep mode, so where it's actually running. And now it's still locked because it's in safe sleep, but it's not inaccessible. You know what I'm saying?
No.
Okay, great. We'll move on.
Oh, you mean the most recent thing that I saw Eric tweet about this. Macs that support authenticated restart with File Vault.
No, I thought that was the same thing that we had talked about, though, that command, that auth restart command.
Well, there's...
That's what I'm talking about. Or Sam, are you talking about
something? Yeah, is this something different, Sam?
Yeah, are you talking about, so you had to run a command to make that happen, correct?
Exactly, right.
So and I haven't tested this yet, but apparently when I was reading some notes that you can, that like for instance, you had an OS 10.9 server, it can restart and get past the File Vault authentication part and go in immediately where the services are running.
But you're only allowed one, right? One restart in that context, I believe.
Really?
Well, for those of you following at home, the knowledge base article from Apple is HT6116. Macs that support authenticated restart with File Vault, and that's a valid number. I'm not making this up. So it's KB5. No, it's HT6116, and you could pull that knowledge base article up, and it talks about the terminal command to do that.
All right, I'm getting to the bottom of this.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Then it sounds like, Sam, then you could remote into the server in that state and unlock the screen and you're good to go, even remotely.
That's what I'm talking about, and unless I read it incorrectly, in which case I'll be pissed at myself. I'm going to check.
But here it is. Authenticated restart only works for the next startup after using these commands. You must use the commands again if you want to restart a second time without unlocking.
Yeah, but which article are you talking about, by the way? You've read it before, but...
Yeah, the HT 6116.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
I'm getting to the bottom of this.
Just to keep our show live and informal, folks, we like to do this stuff sort of.
Yeah, I know I read something else, so I'm going to go in a little deeper and get to the bottom of it. Right. Damn it.
Follow up. That would be great.
Is this live?
We are live.
Is this what they tune in for? So I had an interesting situation this past week where I was contacted by a user. He's an attorney, and he said that the situation he was describing was his Mac wouldn't restart. It would get to like a safe boot where he would get a progress bar. He didn't know it was a safe boot, but it was doing the safe boot. And when it would get almost to the end, the screen would go black and it would go into kind of another safe boot, and it would never fully boot up. It would just stay with a gray screen. So I showed up on site, and we started off with the recovery partition, and the recovery partition told us that the drive was fine. And I went into the reset password in terminal and just made sure that everything was good in his user account with ACLs. And yet, when I restarted the machine, it was still doing that same routine. So then I put his drive in target disk mode and started up Disk Warrior. And the drive showed up as being unmountable, so it was gray. And it wouldn't mount for me, even in Disk Warrior. So at that point I said, well, it looks like, there's something wrong with your drive. And I don't know if we can access the data. It doesn't look like it. I'm not able to. So, do you know where I'm headed with this at all? No. So so I leave, and I said, we'll put in a new drive, and we'll deal with your drive later. We'll see if we can get it to mount. And so I leave, and he brings it into the Apple Store. And again, this is anecdotal because this is what he told me, but supposedly the genius in the Apple Store got the drive to mount by force quitting through Activity Monitor, but you could have done it in, I would imagine, Terminal, the file system check. And, he had it in target disk mode as well. And he was trying to do, run disk util on it, and it wouldn't mount. And by simply killing file system check, the disk was mountable so that the files were accessible.
Wouldn't waiting long enough have resulted?
Well, I waited.
In the same?
I waited. A good long. I know what you're talking about, Joe, and I've seen that before. No, I waited a good long time, and the drive never mounted.
Interesting.
I did get the message. How you get the message from disk utility. This disk cannot be repaired. Please, back up all files and reformat your drive or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So you got that, but it wouldn't mount actually.
Correct.
Interesting.
And it did not mount. Again, and again, this is anecdotal. I need to circle back with the genius that did the work for him.
I love when you say genius, by the way. That's great.
Right. Well, here's the other kicker too. He said to me, he goes, when he called me that night, and of course, he said, yeah, I brought it to the Apple store, and the genius, he got my data, and I'm like, oh, great. He goes, yeah, the kid was only 17 years old, and he was, and I'm like, oh, yeah, hey.
I love your impersonation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's great. But again, according to what he told me, this is how he got the drive to mount.
That's interesting.
You ever heard of that thing?
I've never heard of that. I have seen the really long file system check, where it's using an entire CPU core and taking forever, and finally, it decides it can't repair it, and it goes ahead and says, you're gonna have to back up your data and reformat the drive, and you can usually do that. It will mount as read only, and then you can pull data off of it.
Right. Right.
I think I've had Disk Warrior fix those, fix it in cases like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I've never seen it where it gets to the end of that process and it's not, it doesn't mount. So that's an interesting one in case that happens, to try force quitting file system check before it finishes.
Right. So my next follow-up is just to, circle back next time I'm in the local store and see if I could hunt down this genius and see if he'll tell me what he did. But that's always a great feeling, when
Yeah, right. I know. Yeah.
I realized I'm going to have to listen to the recorded version of the show, because I was not listening for the last 5 minutes because I was looking up FileVault 2 restarts and found out that it is something that was included with 10.9.1, but only after running updates that an unlock key is put into the SMC to unlock the encrypted volume at boot automatically.
After running updates?
Yes.
So it's
Boom.
Now, does that mean, so you're saying it does do the auth restart, essentially the same as the auth restart command to just do that one-time reboot after running updates?
Except the user doesn't have to do the auth restart command.
Right. That makes sense. So you don't have to, slap yourself in the forehead when you accidentally click restart to install those updates on a remote headless server and, screw yourself. So it basically does the right thing in that case, I guess.
Next week, we'll be reviewing Knowledge Base Article 7486. I'm sorry.
So I had one today, too, speaking of, I don't know what it's speaking of. It's speaking of passwords and security. But I texted Jerry for the name of utility he had mentioned to me. And it turns out it was overly complicated for this scenario. And I didn't use it, but it led me down the path of doing basically a keychain dump. This is a built-in function of the security framework where you can say whatever passwords the system has access to, go ahead and just dump them into a terminal window. So this was helpful because a client had forgotten her login password. It's the first time this has ever happened. No, I'm just joking. And in this case, she was convinced she didn't have a password, and I said I've already tried leaving it blank, and I understand, you probably just have it automatically logging in. This is very common, where you just restart your computer and you don't think twice about it. You just to your desktop and you're up and running.
You're such an enabler.
But it's likely you did have a password and it wasn't prompting you, so you've never had to enter it, and yada yada yada. So I assumed that was the case, and I did use the keychain dump function to, to get some of her passwords, like her, email password and stuff like that, so that we could sort of write those down before, inevitably resetting her password. So, it didn't get all of them. So I thought, well, maybe if I restart before kind of messing around with the keychain, I just do a normal restart. It'll take me to the desktop, and I'll just, run the command, and I'll get all the passwords it wasn't able to get for whatever reason on the first try. But I restarted, and I'm confronted with the login window. So I thought, this is weird. And I call her back into the room, and I say, so I'm seeing the login window here. How would you get past this? Like, what password would you put in here to unlock your computer? And she says, no, I just click on my name or something. Maybe I click it twice, I think, something like that. And it just kind of logs me in. I don't have to type a password. So of course I had already tried that, and sure enough, it didn't work. That would have been the case if she had had a blank password with, Mavericks. You see, if you set a blank password and you don't have auto login set in, you get the login window, and you have to click on the icon or the username to log in. But that wasn't working. It was prompting for a password. So I said, it has to be that you had a password. And I had checked her uptime, and I said, I know you restarted like in the last day, like in the last 24 hours. So you must have had to put in a password then. And so it's just like getting stranger and stranger. And she says, well, no, but I did. I was trying everything. I was trying to change it. And I said, you're trying to change it. Did you see this window? And I brought up on my screen the, accounts preference change password window. And she said, yeah, that's the one. And I said, okay. So you were changing your password. Let's see. So she said, yeah, but it didn't work because I didn't know the old password. And I said, that makes sense, because it does require the old password. So we went through a couple scenarios, and we typed, gibberish into the old password thing. And then, you put in a new password and you verify it. And if you have the wrong password under old password and you click change password, of course it says you did not enter the right password, and it blanks out the old password line and, prompts you to type in a new password. Of course, her password was blank, as we determined. So when it blanked it out, if she simply clicked change password a second time, it would have actually changed her password to something that she didn't know, because she had tried about 10,000 in her words. So at least we knew what happened. Now we think, okay, well, she had a blank password, but she went ahead and changed it, and she eventually successfully changed it, but doesn't know what she changed it to. But that was enough to kind of think it through and jog her memory into trying something we had not tried yet, which was like the same as her email password with like a different number at the end. And sure enough, yeah, exactly. No, instead of a 5, it was a 4 at the end or something like that. And so we, tried it, and boom, we were in. And she was like jumping for joy. She felt like a hero that she remembered it. I was like, great job. But it was a lot of detective work to get to that point. But at least at the end, it made some kind of sense, because until then it was like, I don't know how this is possible that it's not auto logging in, but you've never had to type in a password. So that was the answer we finally figured out.
Sheesh.
And then we changed her password to something, that made more sense to her. But that function was really interesting. I had never used it before. But Jerry, your tip had sort of led me down this road, and you can reveal all the passwords that are in the keychain using a simple security command.
That's scary.
Are we revealing something we shouldn't be revealing here? I mean, it's actually a built-in function of the OS, and I guess it's the same way that apps will, access the password that they are allowed to access in the keychain. And it's a command. The command is called security, and I believe it's. I don't remember the command that I used. Actually, I have to look it up. But it was very, very helpful. I think it was like security space dump -keychain, something like that.
Okay, we're all being kicked out of the ACN as well.
And what happens is you get a terminal window full of all your passwords, basically. And remind me to clear my scroll back buffer, right? But then there's a bunch of like just crazy, data, different blobs and things and keys and values and whatnot. But if you do just copy and paste it into like a text edit window and just do a Command F and look for data, the data key basically will show, inside of the data blob is your actual password in cases where the passwords are exposed. So I thought that was very useful. That helped us, get to that point anyway. So
yeah, no, it's and the reason why it's there is because otherwise, every time the Mac would do something that required a password, you would be prompted for your master password to do that, to check mail or to do anything else. So by default, when the machine starts up, the keychain is theoretically unlocked.
Right, exactly. So the fact that we were already logged in allowed us to do this.
That's right.
I had always thought though that like you said, Jerry, if mail wants to check mail is allowed to, access the password that it stored in the keychain. I thought there was some kind of security framework where it would allow just certain applications to do that. But in fact, this will read every readable password from your keychain. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Really
interesting.
Really useful.
Scary.
Yeah, but useful in a case where, like, in this case where you have to reset, or you think you're about to have to reset a user's password, and you're going to lose like her unknown email password, and go down the list. This can be very useful as long as it's auto logging in, like most of them are when they forget their password. So they're not all accessible, but there's a bunch of them that are. So that was pretty handy. Anyway, anything else before we go to our featured interview, pre-recorded with Mike Kingsley?
More anecdotal stories about kids who are 17 who are like smarter than you.
And that genius moniker doesn't really help, right? Because it kind of goes right to their head, and it's so. And then the client is referring to them as a genius. It just adds insult to injury.
And he's just a kid. He's just a kid. He's only 17.
Right. He's going to inherit the earth.
I do want to say thanks to Mike, though, before we go there, for doing the interview with us last week.
Who are we talking about? Wait a minute. Who are we talking about here?
Mr. Mike Kingsley. Of
Kingsley
MacConsulting.
Sorry, I don't mean to do this to you. From Utah, right?
From Utah.
Salt Lake City.
I thought you were
Utah.
quizzing me. What's going on?
No. So we had the pleasure of speaking with him. And go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry. I mean, Sam, please.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. I guess I have the floor now. So I was going to say thanks to Mike Kingsley for talking with us last week. We had a really cool conversation, and it was just a nice, cool roundtable among consultants, which is really what this is all about, right? And to have just another voice on there, but except for us three, which was really awesome, I thought. And Mike gives some good insight into how he started and his thought process on customer service, and a couple of good anecdotal stories as well. So I really appreciate him being here.
Yeah, and some really good tips about working with the Apple Store in a successful way, and things like that. And it's actually really good tips about customer service and sort of the philosophy around that. And I thought it was interesting that Mike started his practice the same year I started mine in 2004. So we're both coming up on our 10-year anniversaries this year, big milestones. And so I think you guys will find the interview very interesting with Mike. And stick around in the chat. We'll be around too. And we'll be back next week with our wonderful full-on live show. Welcome to Command Control Power. We are pleased to be joined this week by Mike Kingsley of Kingsley MacConsulting. He's based in Utah, and he's been a regular in our chat since almost the beginning of our show. So thanks, Mike, for being here and for being such a loyal listener.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it, and I love that you guys have started this show. I've always wanted there to be a podcast like this.
We're happy to fill that void.
Definitely. Yeah, I really feel like it's a great resource where, I think because we talk about issues we're all having, how we can improve our business. And of course, the email list is great ways to do that too. But podcasts, there's just something about hearing each other's voices and really like shooting the breeze with other people.
Yeah, it's a great way to talk shop without actually talking. If you're sort of just listening in your car, it's like you're just hearing other people talk about, what it's like to be in your line of work. It's always fun.
Yeah, and I always try to promote the podcast. I've told the other Apple consultants in my area about it. So,
awesome. Well, thank you for doing that. Yeah,
always appreciated.
Well, there's something very cathartic about listening to someone with a shared experience, because sometimes we feel like, we're voices in the wilderness, and if you don't have a colleague or two to sort of rub elbows with and bounce things off of, this is hopefully at least a resource to feel like there's other people who have that shared experience. So we think
exactly. And for the longest time, I've been the only one in this area doing, at least listed as an official Apple consultant. And I went to a couple of Macworlds back in the day, but sometimes I do feel a little secluded. Like Salt Lake is a pretty big city, but in the region that I'm in, you have to go pretty far to either Denver or Las Vegas or something like that to reach another big city. So
I would imagine that you do have a certain nice chunk of work being perhaps the only authorized or certified consultant in the area.
Yeah, I've been very lucky that way, very blessed. I started my business back in 2004 full time, and I was the first one that I at least know of. I mean, when I got on the list, I was the only one, and I was trying to remember if there was even anyone like listed where the closest one was. Usually it's like Boise, Idaho, or Denver, or like I mentioned, Las Vegas. So yeah, if you ever look at a map, you can kind of see how Salt Lake is kind of. I mean, I know there's other areas like that in the Midwest where you can go far distances before you reach another big city, but for some reason, Utah was just, I feel, underserved. And now we actually have 3 official Apple stores in the region, and they're all pretty close to each other, and that's pretty unheard of for our population size. The stores may be just talking it up, but they claim that this is one of the best regions in the area. In fact, there's been stories about Utah's economy has always been fairly strong, even when everyone's had down economies.
It sounds like a really nice market to be in.
Yeah.
And how is that? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to observe. So, Mike, you're coming up on your 10-year anniversary just like I am.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
10-year anniversary. Yeah.
2004. That's that's when I started too. And I just read this article recently that was posted on Daring Fireball. It was Horace Dediu had written this article comparing the growth of Mac versus Windows, and sort of when the turning point happened when Apple started to make some headway in their market share versus Windows. And what do you know? It was in 2004, so it was a big year.
Yeah, I think I definitely saw that, and I was pretty lucky there too. Just to tell you a little bit more about how I started my business, I guess like a lot of us, I have roots from enjoying working on computers ever since I was a kid. I remember getting my first Apple IIe. My dad bought it in 1984. And so I owe a lot to him because he heard about this thing called personal computers. You can get one in your house, Wow. And so he bought one, and I was instantly hooked. And we kind of went through the revisions. Apple IIe, got an Apple IIgs. That was my favorite computer for the longest time. Did any of you guys ever play with the Apple IIgs?
Oh yeah,
I never heard of that.
Yeah, actually, yeah, it was.
That was the first color and sound one, 16-bit. It was like all the rave,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they had color on the Apple IIgs long before the Mac started getting color. And so I was like, Mac, who cares about Mac? They're black and white, It wasn't until, the late 80s that they started getting color in the Macs. And I was a Apple IIgs holdout for a while. But, and then the Apple division kind of fizzled out and was left and everything. But, I loved the Macs just as much. But I was always a laptop guy. I remember I got the PowerBook 540C, and that was my first laptop.
Wow.
That was the first color one too, I think, or right around one of the first color laptops that they made. And from there, I loved working on computers. I remember going to friends' houses just to back up, in the 80s again, and they had maybe whatever, it was like a Commodore or an Amiga or some computer like that. And, I thought they were interesting too, and it was fun to kind of tinker around and do stuff in the DOS prompt or whatever it was called back then. But I saw really quickly, we would try to do things, and just to get sound working on their computer, we'd have to type in a bunch of commands, cross our fingers they would work. I'm like, well, wait a second, sound just works on my Apple. There's no problems at all. Why do we have to type in commands to get sound to work, on this other computer? So I really felt like, they had their purpose also, but the Apple computers really provided this whole experience, a way that people can easily catch on to a computer. And
so what was the turning point for you when you when you decided to sort of take both of your feet and jump into the deep end of the pool?
Yeah, good question. So I always kind of knew I wanted to do something with computers. And when I was going to college right around 2000, that was kind of like Apple's was just barely getting out of its doomsday era. And but even leading up through high school and college, I was like, well, I'm probably going to have to get into just networking, or I thought it'd be like Cisco was the big rage back then, become a Cisco specialist. And I knew I didn't really want to do Windows stuff, but I knew I wanted to do something with computers. And I got a couple jobs before where I was like a tech specialist for a school district in the area. And because I knew the Apple stuff, I was kind of like the de facto Apple guy. But about 2004-ish, I heard about this Apple Consultants Group thing. I think I was just reading a blog site it could have been something like Apple Insider or Mac Rumors or something like that. And they were probably just posting a news item on how either something about the program had changed, or here's the Apple Consultants Network or whatever. I'm like, oh, this sounds interesting. You can join a network and get some resources through Apple to find a way to help others out. So I joined it, but I was still, this was just testing the waters. I was like, okay, because I had a job through the school district. I'm like, do I really want to do this full time? It's going to be hard to start from scratch. So I ran into a really great opportunity where there was another Apple reseller in the area. They kind of were a vertical market reseller where they sold large format printers, but they also sold Apple products. And they did hardware repairs, and they also did Apple Consulting, where the owner at the time had just knocked door to door on a lot of businesses and said, hey, he went to all the design firms back in the day and everything like that in the Salt Lake area and said, hey, do you guys need any Mac help? And he kind of built up this clientele. Anyways, the original guy sold it to this the company that did the printer sales and the Apple stuff. And they thought they were going to run off with that, but for some reason they had money issues. So they were looking for someone to kind of take over the business. And I found them on Craigslist they were advertising a position to be a tech. And when I talked to the owner, he's like, yeah, we want to be a tech, but if you want to even just take over the business, great.
Wow.
So I know. And it gets better. It gets better. I mean, I looked at, kind of the books. They were very open about things. They showed me how many clients they had on retainer, which was about a good 15 or so, and how many other hundreds of clients that are just, one-off calls and things like that. And he must have just been having money problems, because he did a fire sale and he sold it to me at less than what they make in 1 year. Wow. And so I'm like, I'm snapping this up. I got a business loan, worked out the details. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to, go guns blazing. I was already part of the Apple Consultants Network, and now I'm like, okay, I can really start doing this full time. And it just grew from there, and it took off, and I never regret making that decision.
Holy smokes, man. Yeah. I mean, talk about stepping in it. You look at applying for a job, and all of a sudden you own a business. And it's amazing. That's great, though.
Yeah, I know. And I think it just kind of all lined up. But I really feel like it's too bad. I mean, it's good for me that it didn't work out for them. But then shortly after that, I'm trying to remember when we got our first Apple store. But, things were growing. And that was like what Joe said, Apple was starting to get more popular then, and more people were buying computers. And I've been kind of lucky where I never really had to do much advertising or finding people. Of course, I'm always a good business guy where I run into people. I'm like, hey, and if you know anyone that needs Mac help, I'm your guy. But really, people just kind of came to me, through client referrals, and, customer support's really important that way, but also through the Apple Consultants list. I've had a fair amount of people, but really my biggest benefit has been the Apple stores. I've gotten so many great referrals from the Apple stores that I just cannot believe how good that's been for me.
Well, that's great. I mean, like you were for a while the only game in town, right? So, yeah. I mean, even now, there's very limited competition for you, though, right? There are a couple other guys.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, for most times, on and off, I've been the only one. And a couple times, there's been one or two other people, and then no one for a long time. And right now, there are two other people along with me, and it's still not even a problem because we have 3 Apple stores in the area. So 3 consultants for 3 Apple stores, that's no big deal. This is a pretty big market. We have a multi-million amount of people with Salt Lake, how big of a city it is in the region. And it's just been great. No issues there.
That's really great. That's really lucky. It's reminds me of how I got started, just kind of like on a whim, going and looking for some work, and I had not even been doing anything Apple related, and what do you know, they needed a guy like to start tomorrow, and that's how I kind of got my start. It was just pure luck, and here I am, 10 or 11 years later, since getting some training at a local Apple specialist. So it's sometimes big changes in life happen that way, and they're just really, you look back, it's like, how did I do that?
I feel almost guilty at times because a lot of people have to hit it hard, and right now it looks like the other Apple consultants I have a pretty good relationship with. I wish the best for them, and it looks like they pretty much started from scratch. I mean, they may have had a couple big clients they started with, but I wish them the best in getting started. But still, like with me, it was like I didn't have to start from scratch, and it's got to be hard. Anyone who does that.
Yeah, it sounds like your story is very serendipitous. Although you probably felt like you really worked up to it, and when you bought into the business, you were ready to go.
Exactly.
Whereas if it had maybe come to you a year or two earlier, you may not have been where you needed to be to sort of hit the pavement running. And it sounded like it was just perfect timing for you. So
yeah,
that's great.
You always need to be ready, and that's the thing, as we know in this business, is like, we do our jobs during the day and then we come home and we do research. And it's because we got to be prepared for what issues are out there, so that when we read a blog tonight and someone said, oh no, the new iPhone system that just came out is crashing everything, then when people call us tomorrow, we're not like totally surprised. We're like, okay, here's our game plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to be client zero, so to speak. Mm-hmm. The first person that tests it or researches it and all that. So that's a very good game plan to have. I wanted to ask you a quick question about your relationship with the Apple stores, though. I mean, because of how things have changed with the consultants network. I mean, I know I used to be able to go in and just hand in a big stack of business cards, and they used to just give them out for me. And that changed a lot of the ways with OnForce and all of that. How is your relationship with them in that respect? Do they do stuff like that for you? Do you know that a personal relationship with them can help you get recommended over anybody else?
Yeah, it's a good question. I pretty much know that they've gotten to the point where they don't accept business cards anymore or ask for them. But I really do feel like in this area, well, first of all, OnForce was never even considered. I've never had anyone from OnForce contact me saying to join the program. Plus, when I talk to all the Apple Store business leads in the area, they're like, we don't even think it's great of an idea, and we're just going to continue to tell people to go to the Apple Consultants list. I mean, they kind of told me how they couldn't really recommend me specifically, but when I was the only game in town, they're like, well, we're just going to do it anyways. And then, or they say go to the Apple Consultants list if they feel like being a little more official. Or there's only one guy,
They can recommend the 5th guy down on the list for your area who's 250 miles
away. But even now, I mean, I think luckily the Apple Consultants has had a good reputation in this area. And so all the store people really feel like, OnForce isn't a consideration, and they just tell customers to check out the Consultants Apple list. And even to kind of also more directly answer your question, like I'm the only one in my area that does server stuff. The other Apple Consultant guys pretty much just do, desktop stuff. And the Apple stores know that also, and they kind of are at the point now where when they pre-qualify with the customer, if it's server things, they kind of guide them and say, well, this is the person that does server stuff.
Yeah, I've had that as well. I've heard that from some local stores where they say, when I'm referring people to the ACN list, I bring this page up and they show me the page, and it's like, a page of whatever it is, 6 or 7 people. And then they say, I just tell them to look for somebody with a dot, here and here. And that kind of limits it to like, me and a couple other people.
Me?
Yeah, exactly. You guys. So, yeah. So they have their ways of kind of like, pointing out a specific few people, who they've had good experience with while sort of maintaining, I don't know, Apple's rules about it. So it's helpful to I mean, if you go to the stores, this is the same advice everybody always gives you. Even if you are in a crowded market, if you show your face once in a while and they have some awareness of who you are, or if you have your clients, let them know that they have, you've helped them. Then
exactly.
Stores will remember that. So
there's a lot you can do. I mean, I try to just whenever I go into the stores, I ask them, okay, well, first I might ask anything I can help you guys out with. And then I ask them maybe what issues they may be running into or what customers are wanting these days. And it really feels like, that way they can see that, I care about what's going on there. And I try to give them little token things too from time to time for double reasons. I mean, part of it's selfish, like when they are going to refer a server person to me, I don't want them referring it for all the bad reasons, like, oh, server can do this and this. I'm like, well, not so well, So, right. As we know, people that work on the server, there's some things that excels at and other things that it doesn't. So I've sent them PDFs, little PowerPoint presentations, listing, here's what I feel server's excellent at, and here's other things that you may not want to consider it for. And then they really feel like I'm helping them out with this information, so they don't have to just fly blindly and just purely go off the Apple marketing.
That's interesting, Mike. And I believe earlier, several podcasts ago, you were generous enough to share.
I did. Yeah, that's
with
right.
us. Yeah, that PowerPoint presentation or that keynote. And so I was really excited that you were able to do this at the store. So just an interesting anecdote to that was I approached the closest store to me, and you guys know where that is. And it was like as if I was suggesting letting loose the Ebola virus inside the store. He was the business manager was like, "Oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. There's just no way." So it's interesting. These relationships are dynamic that we have with the stores. And even though it's important to reach out, sometimes, you make every effort to try to get some traction inside of a store, and you just can't do it because it's either, they're hearing they're getting the edict that's handed down from the regional manager. And, the regional manager, I think for the stores up around my way, as opposed to the ones down by Joe or Sam, it's a different person. But essentially, they're reading from the same script, that there's just no way that we're going to support a consultant coming in doing a presentation unless it's for a specific application that they don't have training for in the store. Like in Joe's case, he's a Lightspeed expert.
Well, to be fair and to clarify, I didn't do a presentation of it, but I gave them the presentation so they had an email copy of it. So the business team really looks over it so they know what they can tell the customers.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah. So I misunderstood.
And it was branded for you though, right? I mean, it had your company logo in it.
Yeah.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm offering, I have brought up, okay, if you guys ever would be okay with me giving a presentation, and they didn't give any reaction like, oh, that probably won't work, but they didn't say yes either. So maybe it is kind of like you say, they probably don't want anything except for official presentations done. Who knows?
Yeah. And I've had that experience with, even just in the last few years, trying to hand out my business card, as you guys have mentioned, they won't accept it. I mean, they won't even take it out of your hand sometimes, So there's definitely some rules that come down, and they've been warned, and and those guys are trying to keep their job, and they're trying to do right by Apple and everything. So, and I'm sure they're checking up on each other, and so. You have to be aware of what the rules they're facing, and if you can work around it by just kind of firing off an email and saying, here's something, make of it what you will, that's one way to handle it. And showing your face in there, they can't stop you from doing that. So just giving them the awareness of who you are, and putting a face with the name on the website and all is definitely good stuff to do.
Yeah, and one last point about this is I think. I'm trying to remember if they asked me once straight up, but they know that I'm not threatened by joint venture. And I wonder if Apple Store people feel like, oh, the consultants, they probably like, we're doing this joint venture thing and they're doing their own thing, and we don't want the two to mix up. But my store, I mean, I've had the business people tell me straight up, like, oh, yeah, we know that joint venture is just a very limited subset of what you would even do. And you do all the on-site stuff and you do all the third-party stuff. And so they know that, I'm not trying to fight with them. I'm not competing with them. I'm not afraid of joint venture. We talk well back and forth. There's been couple really minor issues in the past where like they recommended one set of products and I talked to the customer and I'm like, well, this isn't quite going to work out because what they need to do is in a pure Windows environment or something like that. And I explained it and really succinctly why it was going to be that way. And I think it all went well. I mean, I just must have a good rapport with them. I think luck is a lot of it, but also just showing them that you're willing to work with them and you're not worried about what's happening either.
Yeah, you can't go in there like Jerry says and stink up the place. You know, you have to. You don't want to go in there and start, saying Apple
joint venture sucks.
Yeah, right. Apple Care, joint venture. What are you guys crazy?
Yeah.
So I mean, getting points from Apple, I love to say things like that when I'm in the Apple store. I always recommend Apple Care. I'll say that out loud and make sure that salespeople hear it. For example, because I do. I mean, I do recommend it to my clients. I want them to be able to just have the peace of mind that their stuff is covered and they're going to get 3 years plus out of it. And same thing with joint venture. I don't recommend it, as actively as I do Apple Care. But I was reading recently on the list this came up, and I know, Mike, you've been pretty active on the ACN alumni list as well, where someone was mentioning, one of the benefits is that you get like priority Genius Bar reservations. So if there are no more reservations available at the Genius Bar, there may be reservations available if you have joint venture. You can get an appointment the same day when otherwise you might have to wait a day or so. You can sort of walk in and skip the line, that kind of thing. And not to mention the loaner computer, which may not be useful in and of itself, but it may be useful if your client has joint venture and they come back from the Apple store with a loaner machine and you can restore from their time machine backup and they can, not really miss a beat. So it's a partnering kind of thing where if they have Apple Care, it makes our life easier. If they have joint venture, it may help them get better service from Apple, and it may make our life easier by keeping them up and running more easily. Mm-hmm. So, it never hurts to, kind of partner with Apple in that way.
Yeah, the priority service thing is a good benefit. My largest retainer, they have joint venture also, and mostly just for the priority service and the loaner machine.
Yeah, and it may be helpful just for those reasons, and and supposedly there's a limit with the number of machines I guess what does it cover, up to 5 machines or something like that, or
but it does seem like it's somewhat flexible on that.
Exactly. So I think that they're not as strict with enforcement of that. If they'd probably rather you have the account and you have a chance to use it over the course of a year versus you haven't paid for the service and you're in the back of the line with everybody else. I think they're happy to accommodate you once you've got that coverage.
I have a really funny story where I had one client and he did this all on his own, and I was in there for another issue, and he had up on his whiteboard, he's like this very analytical guy, he's like an engineer, and I guess the business team guy had just called him recently trying to sell him joint venture. And he had on his whiteboard, it was 2 sides. One side was joint venture. The other side was Mike Kingsley. And he was listing like the pros and cons and like the amount for different things and stuff. And he was like, I can't even say it half as good as he did. He was like, well, for this and this and the amount I'd be paying for joint venture. And he's like, I told the business store people I'd way rather just use Mike Kingsley.
That's a great, great reference for you.
Yeah. It was hilarious.
That's pretty good.
Joe mentioned the ACN alumni list, and I was looking for an email from you because we recently communicated, and I see just how active you really are on that list, and that always impresses me. Like, Joe's pretty active on there as well. I'm pretty bad at that, but I think that's also a big aspect of what we do in the community that we're in, that to give back and to kind of, relay some of your thoughts or ideas or help somebody else out by using the list, or even just asking a question out there.
Yeah.
That always impresses me, and it really is motivating me to be more active there.
Well, thank you. I feel like I have to be, because I remember when I started, and again, I have Mac knowledge built up over the years of just playing with the computers. But I remember when I first got started, I'm like, okay, I don't have server knowledge and stuff like that. And it can be really intimidating at first, especially when you join the Apple Consultants group and there's these people that have been there for 10 or plus years and are server experts and everything. I'm like, boy, am I going to ask stupid questions and things like that? But all along, I really felt like Well, first of all, I always try to do my due diligence before asking a question. And then if I can't figure something out, I try to ask it in a succinct way. But I really feel blessed that people gave me great answers even from day one and helped me along the way, so that I feel like I have to give it back, and I'm not always going to be answering like awesome, like, oh, I found this cool shell script way to reprogram it so it's going to change everyone's lives. But even just small things that may seem obvious to you or me, but it's something that for whatever reason the other person hasn't run into for a very long time or whatever, we can just kind of bring back to remembrance for other people.
Yeah. I mean, some things are obvious because we've just by experience only, and so someone just hasn't had that experience. So you can relay that to them and then they can take that and run with it.
Yeah, it's a great service to be able to provide that, and it's good karma. It comes around. So it's a good way to give back.
Well, yeah, and I also tell everyone in my area that sometimes they'll ask me questions, and then I'm like, boy, it's really got to join the email list, because you can ask questions there, and a lot of people respond back, and I really hope we can tell everyone in all our areas and to join these email lists. I mean, every once in a while, I'll see someone join the email list and like, wow, this is a great resource. I never knew about this, So it's great if people knew.
Right.
So I wanted to cover one. Oh, sorry, Jared. Did you have something?
No, I was going to just because I'm very interested in hearing about this as well. Is Mike? You had mentioned in your notes prior to getting on the line with us that you had worked for Disney, and you shared a little bit of their philosophy in dealing with customers. And I was hoping you'd share a little bit of that with us and how that translates into your own consulting business.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I grew up in Southern California, even though I'm in the Utah area now, and I grew up 20 minutes from Disneyland. And people that live down there go there growing up. Basically, we get annual passes for like $100 a year. We can walk in whenever we want, and a lot of people take it for granted. But like out of high school, I decided to get a job there because they need a lot of employees during the summer and stuff. And it was actually my first job, and people kind of just say this, but it really is true. Like Disney has some of the best customer service, and at least at the parks, and ways that they train their employees. Like when you hire in at Disneyland or Disney World or places like that, they have week-long training before you even start your job. And 3 of those days is just purely on customer service, and then the other 2 days is on your actual job. And I was a ride operator, so the 2 days at the end would be learning your ride, but the first 3 days is just customer service. You're sitting in 8-hour days watching videos, going through scenarios, role playing, and all that stuff. And, there's some things I kind of took away from that. A lot of things I think are obvious to me, and, from hearing you guys speak over time, and I think like all of us kind of have this built-in sense, but there's a couple things that, I really felt was interesting. Is like, one thing is owning issues and really following through with them. And again, it's kind of obvious, but like for one example, like when you work at Disneyland, if someone had an issue, like let's say you're in the front of the line in the greeter position, and some kid comes up and spills their ice cream cone and starts crying. Well, you get to own that issue, and you get to you have like little walkie-talkies, and you get to call to your lead and say, okay, I'm leaving my post. And then you get to walk with the customer over to the stand where they sell the ice cream cones, talk to the person selling the ice cream cones and say, hey, this kid here dropped his ice cream cone. Let's get him another one for free. No big deal. You own the issue, and you get to take care of it that way. And I really thought, wow, it's not just an employee like, oh, you dropped your ice cream cone? Well, go over to the store over there and you can get another one. I mean, that's not even so bad either, but you're really kind of walking them through the process, for lack of better, terminology. And I just thought that was just really amazing. And also ways to deal with when people get upset. That doesn't happen. I can't think of hardly ever too often when people get truly upset doing my job now. But I remember a couple times where like people would be in line and almost got in fights at Disneyland. And you really have to kind of, hear both sides of the story and kind of help them both out in a way where they really feel like they're the one that's right. We always say the customer's right,
Yeah.
So like one person would be like, we take them aside and say like, oh, okay, I'm sorry that happened to you. And here's what we'll do. Cause you're such a great person. I mean, you don't say it like that, patronizing them, but we're like, here's what we'll do. We're going to give you a pass to come back on the ride You don't have to wait in the line. You can come back anytime today. You get the backdoor entrance is what they call it. And we'll let you right on and we'll give you priority service. And they're like, oh, that's pretty awesome, you know? And then we'll do the same thing with the other person, you know, that's over on the other side. And so it doesn't really matter who started it or whose fault it was, but we just want everyone to be happy in the long run. And, you know, it's the same thing with doing our job here with the computer issues. You know, you kind of, when someone's frustrated, their computer's not working and, you know, like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. And, you know, you just kind of have to see what they're feeling about and what truly they, you know, because sometimes it's not just, they may say like, well, the computer's not starting up fast enough or something, but their true frustration might be like, well, I've been working on this computer for a long time and really it's not so much that the computer doesn't start up fast enough. You know, they start calming down and saying other things, you know, and you start hearing a different story later on. And you have to really hear them, really kind of repeat what they're saying. Like, okay, so are you saying that you feel like the program isn't opening quickly and it used to open quicker? And then if they say yes, then you dug for more information, which you need to do anyways, because it's not that the program never opened quickly. So maybe that would be their computer was never faster. But if the program used to open quicker, you know, their computer used to be faster and now it's not. And so just little things like that just really help. Oh, and one other quick point is explaining what you're doing. I mean, obviously you can't be like, well, I'm going to the command line now and I'm typing in, you know, all this stuff, but you can try to bring it down to a really basic level and explain what they're doing. I've seen too many computer techs, maybe just on the Windows side or whatever, they'll just do their job. They're very antisocial and they'll say, okay, it's fixed, and they'll just leave. But I always try to go over what I did and why I did it and give analogies. I'm like, okay, the computer broke down because of this reason, or you need more RAM. And I give the analogy of the freeway. I'm like, okay, the processor speed is the speed limit on the freeway, and the RAM is how many lanes you have on the freeway. And if you only have a 2-lane freeway, that's why you're getting a lot of bottlenecks. So you need an 8-lane freeway. It'll make everything run much faster. And I think people just really appreciate that. And you know, a lot of these things may seem common sense to us, but you just really always have to be working on it. I think the consultants that are in my area now are great, but I've heard a lot of horror stories of the consultants in my area in the past, and they haven't lasted. And I'm like, come on, isn't it obvious? You just got to treat customers well, and that's how you'll get referrals.
Yeah. I love that last point that you made, though, about walking them through it. So many people appreciate that in a big way, to just slightly understand what you did for them.
Yeah, even server stuff. You can explain it in a basic way, you know?
Right. No, it's big time. And then they walk away feeling, okay, this guy didn't just type on the keyboard and walk away. I kind of have a better understanding of what just happened to me here.
Mm-hmm. Right, because a lot of times you're also engaging them in a process of, you know, making decisions like, you know, do we want to replace this, or do we want to, like, you know, kind of wait and see what happens, or, you know, do we want to renew the warranty on this, or are we okay to, like, let it go and, you know, we plan to upgrade later in the year or whatever. And, you know, walking them through like what happened and how severe it was and giving them those analogies can be really helpful to help them, you know, empower them to make a decision like that, or to engage with you on that. So,
and one last thing that I really thought was important I have in my notes here as far as following through with issues is when you can't help them with something, don't just be like, oh, sorry, I can't help with that. Try to be prepared with an answer of who can help them. You know, they really appreciate that. Like, I don't really do any PC stuff. I just don't have the time or desire to do Windows stuff. I mean, of course, I'm going to help people install parallels and stuff like that. But I've worked out where I have another company, a contractor in there, a guy I trust. We're like, okay, you need some PC help. Here's a guy who can help you. Or, oh, you need some training on FileMaker. Well, I'll find someone for you. You know, don't just be like, I don't do that. So sorry. You know, you just want to help them find an answer to something, even if you're not the one that does it, or someone to call who can find the answer for them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do that same referral process with any kind of PC work, like you said, beyond, you know, just kind of installing a Windows virtual machine and some software, you know, any kind of ongoing maintenance with Windows in particular, I refer out. And, you know, it's great to be able to say I have a great guy, you know, who I've heard great things about, who has also sent me a lot of clients who are happy with him, you know. That goes a long way. And That reminds me of a comment you made. I think it was last week in the chat about how you've been getting more and more busy, and you've been starting to turn down more work. And I find myself in the same position where, not that I'm turning down work really, but there's been cases where I've been tempted to. A case where you just don't get a great sense from the person, or you feel like you may not be the most effective, person at dealing with a certain problem. But you don't want to leave them high and dry, as you mentioned in the chat.
Yeah.
So is that kind of your main, way of dealing with that is just having a referral handy? And what do you do in a case where it's not a PC thing, but it is a Mac thing, and you just don't feel like you want to deal with it?
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, with especially now the other consultants in the area, sometimes they specialize more in someone needs Pages training or things like that. I prefer to do more like the big picture, server, networking, implementation, setup, repair, stuff like that. I don't really like to get into too much of the detailed level. Okay, here's a 2-hour training on numbers. So when people ask me those questions, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not the best person to help you out with that, but here's one of the other consultants you can call. I don't think I've ever really had to turn down someone and not have an answer for them. But usually when I turn down someone, it's because it sounds like they have Mac and PC stuff. And then when I really start talking to them about it, it's more like, well, they really only have one Mac, and the issues they're having is a bunch of PC issues. And I'm like, okay, well, let's refer you to one of the other consultants that also does Windows stuff. I don't turn down too many people, but I'm kind of getting to the point where, because I am busier, I'm kind of definitely considering that more. And I don't have any other employees right now or anything. I don't really have a desire to, but it's great when you do have a relationship with the other consultants in the area and you feel like you can trust passing work back and forth that way.
Well, that is extremely helpful. The problem is, at least in my immediate, and again, everybody's environment is a little bit different. In my immediate area, other than Joe and Sam, which are a little bit a ways from where I'm located, I don't really feel like there's anyone in the area that shares the same philosophy, and you sharing...
Yeah. Exactly.
What you learned as a very young man at Disneyland. I mean, you talking about that. I mean, and listening to it as a listener, just sitting back going like, wow, that's obvious. But, I think what really kind of I took away from listening to you describe that is not only were you required to provide a resolution to the problem, you also mediated the problem. So I think that probably is really helpful for us to do in our businesses. Not only, like we had just said, solve the problem for the client, but actually guide, somehow bring the client mediate this situation in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the point about ownership too, you're not only saying like, well, no problem, I can ensure that, or I can assure you that someone at the ice cream stand will simply give you a new ice cream cone. Just go ahead and run over there and do it. It's actually, you've witnessed the problem and you're now taking ownership of it until you see it resolved yourself with your own eyes. And that goes a long way too, just in, otherwise it's a big leap of faith. If I tell a client, just go to the Apple store, they'll take care of you. Maybe that is the next step, is for them to walk into the Apple store, and I may not, meet them there and escort them there, but I make sure that they're aware that I actually care about the outcome. I want to know that, Apple either took care of it and they're 100% fixed, or I want to be given an opportunity to make it right if Apple
Yeah,
can.
Exactly. 95% of the time we can't go into the Apple store when they're first meeting with them, but I always do love the opportunities where I can.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a good one. I mean, just the other day, the Apple Store, someone came in with an issue with a hard drive or a machine that had water damage. So they told them to call Drive Savers. Drive Savers said, this doesn't sound like a big time issue. You should call HCS Technology Group and they can help you out instead of sending it to us. But they told them, call us and let us know what happened. And when I ultimately, I restored their data and stuff like that, but I told them for another issue to talk to these guys. And I'm like, call me and let me know. They're like, geez, you guys all want to know what happens. You guys all care so much about what's going on. He's like, that's so weird.
That's great. That's really great.
Yeah. I know. I always want to know what happened. I actually, that brings up a point. Like, when someone used another person, or if someone had an issue and they resolved it on their own, I'm always like, and I don't want to bug someone. I don't want them to be like, sometimes people are sheepish about like, oh yeah, I fixed this on my own, I feel stupid or whatever. But I always love to know, oh, what happened? You want to tell me about it, because then you just feel more invested with everything.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, well, that sets apart, I think, the really good consultants from others, people who are dabbling. I think you really have to care a lot, because there's a lot of stuff that just gets really annoying if you don't care. It's just it's just drudgery of it. So you actually literally legitimately have to care, I think, about the outcome, and it does show when you're interacting with the client that you do care. So it leads to more success, I think.
Mike, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us that you feel like we haven't touched on in terms of?
No, that's great, and I just was glad I could have the opportunity to talk. I just you kind of feel like you're commiserating with other people, and just kind of just seeing how everyone else's businesses work and how mine works, and it's great to get little validations, and then also little pushes along the way, like, oh, it's been great hearing from your guys' stories, and like, okay, should I consider buying into more managed services or hiring an employee or things like that? It's always good, so I don't just stay lazy and in the zone. Just find ways. I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm great where I'm at, but I always should be reevaluating just in case.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things I got from the mailing list, way back when I started out, were those stories and the commiseration and just sort of like, some validations, some ideas too, just business growth ideas and stuff like that. That was the most fun part of just being a lurker on the mailing list and sometimes participating. And now doing the show, I think that's one thing we can bring to the table. So it's great to hear from a voice like yours, Mike, and see you in the chat week after week. And but yeah, thank you again for participating. Yeah,
no problem. And my Twitter handle is at MC Kingsley. So that's MC Kingsley.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks again. And everybody else, if you're not on Twitter, you can certainly join us at commandcontrolpower.com/live, and you'll probably find Mike there on most Tuesday nights, along with our other regular listeners. And you can find us there too, Tuesday nights at 8:30 Eastern time. And thanks again, Mike, for doing the interview. We look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a century combined of Apple expertise right now. My Mac is slow.